Okay. And can I just get a thumbs up from someone that you can see my screen? Okay, see the slides. I can see Jill nodding, so I'm going to take that as a yes, it looks okay. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. I'm Elisabeth. I'm going to give a little bit more of an introduction to myself and the team in just a moment. But first, our sincere thanks for taking some time out of your lunchtime to talk with us about this idea of scholarship of teaching and learning and the spectrum from SoTL to educational research, which we're keen to chat with you about today. Oh, if I can get my screen to advance. Okay. We wanted to start by acknowledging that our work, the work of the UBC School of Nursing and the work of LearnLab, happens on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people on what we now call UBC Point Grey, Vancouver campus. And what you can see on this slide is a really beautiful view of Pacific Spirit Park and the campus. And to me, it's just a lovely reminder of how close we are to the beauty of British Columbia and how it's sort of right outside our door and how much that contributes to our health and well-being and how grateful we are to the Musqueam people and other Indigenous peoples who've cared for the land that we occupy for so long. And then on the other side of the screen, what you see is a picture I just took yesterday. This is outside of the forestry building here on campus. And you can see part of the incredible reconciliation pole in that picture. And around it, for those of you who haven't made a trip over to the reconciliation pole recently, all of the sort of mown grass was removed and replaced with wildflowers, wildflower seeds that are native to this area. And what is growing there are these incredible tall plants, and each one of them has a dozen or more of these beautiful pink flowers, and they're coming into bloom. And because there's an amazing metal musqueam carving at the bottom of the reconciliation pole, it radiates heat. So the flowers that are closest to the pole are blooming first and sort of radiating out that way. It's truly beautiful. It's worth the walk over. And just, yeah, incredibly grateful to have that both close to my home and close to where we all work. And it's a beautiful, I think, kind of unfolding visual representation of Indigenous resurgence and reclamation. So worth checking out. I would invite you, since we're here in a virtual space, to share where you're joining from in the chat. And yeah, grateful to be with you here today. So I want to take a moment to just have our team members introduce ourselves briefly. We know most of you, but not all of you. And so maybe I'll hand it over to Nasim to just share a quick introduction.
Sure. Thank you, Elisabeth. Hi, everyone. I am Nasim Atami. Many of you I actually don't know. So my pronouns are she and her. I'm a very old part of this school, so I've done my nursing degree and PhD and everything here in this space, and now I'm currently a lecturer teaching in both the undergrad and graduate programs. I was told to talk about what my educational research work is really focused on, and I have two broad focuses, I would say. One of them is around how do we do best practices around conducting ethical and rigorous educational research that involves integrated knowledge translation and student engagement. Specifically, in educational research, you know, what I've been trying to work with is around how to do this work in a good way when our participants are our own students, and how to do that in a ethical way and rigorous way. The other thing that I focus on quite a bit is actually around how to optimize learning through best teaching and learning strategies. And often for me, this has involved, much of this work has involved or has been guided by students as partners, theory or pedagogy. So a lot of close collaboration with learners in my own space, and a lot of conversations and thinkings have ignited much of my projects, I would say. And so the research has kind of started in my own classroom, in my own practices, and hopefully it will kind of go beyond that to talk about, to think about it in a bigger scope, I guess. beyond our own classrooms and school. I'm going to pass to Elisabeth. You're next.
I am. Thanks, Nassim. So as I said, I'm Elisabeth Bailey. I'm an associate professor of teaching here in the School of Nursing. And just as a quick overview, my primary areas of interest with respect to SoTL and educational research are exploring belonging and mattering in nursing education and practice, the idea of self, but importantly, collective care in nursing education and practice. And I'm going to share a little bit about my work related to that later today. And then also translating quality improvement methodologies into nursing educational practices. And I think there's a lot of overlap between SoTL and QI work. So for example, looking at the way we can use tools like Plan, Do, Study, Act or PDSA cycles as a framework for planning and evaluating SoTL projects, especially in health disciplines. So those are my areas of interest, and I'll pass to Carla.
Hello, everyone. Could you hear me okay? Thanks. So my name is Carla Ferriera, and I am an associate professor of teaching in the School of Nursing. Thank you all for sharing your lunch hour with us. My scholarly work focuses on areas concerning how nurse educators teach and learn, and how nursing students learn best. And usually the inquiry around nursing student learning often involves simulation as an intervention. But I am also curious and interested in other topics such as faculty and professional development. The topics or concepts of socialization, professional identity formation, expertise development are all areas that I find quite compelling to explore. And I'll pass the mic to my colleague Ash.
Thank you, Carla. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming to hear about what we've been doing and our work. My name is Ash Scott, and I'm also an associate professor of teaching in the School of Nursing. And I've got very broad interests when it comes to the scholarship of teaching and learning and educational research in nursing. But I guess my particular area of expertise is around the development and evaluation of AI-driven tools for use in education. And I'm going to share one of those with you a little bit later on.
Hey, thanks, Ash, and everybody. So we wanted to take just a moment to let you know, what does Learn Lab stand for, and how do we come to this work? So Learn Lab, the long version, is Leadership Excellence and Research in Nursing Education. Like lots of acronyms, we couldn't quite get the E in, but you get the idea. We are very interested in concepts related to teaching, learning, and educational scholarship in nursing. We do have a vision, right, of creating a future for nursing practice and education where every nurse feels supported, connected, and empowered. And we think of that journey as starting on the first day of a nursing student's experience in nursing school throughout their whole career, wherever their practice takes them. So that might be at the bedside, but it could also be practice in classrooms, like many of us, in leadership roles, in research, and beyond. As a group, we're committed to exploring and understanding, cultivating excellence in teaching, learning, and nursing practice, and using educational research and knowledge mobilization to share those ideas broadly. And opportunities like this are really an important part of that mission. We have a few values that you can check out on our Learn Lab website, but one that we really wanted to highlight today is this value of collaboration. So we believe that teaching, learning, and research are inherently collaborative. And to do good work, you have to be rooted in strong and supportive relationships. We very much live that as a team. We do the work together. As we sort of go through and share some of the projects that we're currently working on, you'll see there's some very explicit collaboration that happens. And there's also things that are less explicit, like the conversations over lunch, the continuous kind of supportive texting and messaging of one another, the can I just bounce this idea off of you quickly, and all of that ongoing background support that really, really makes a difference to feeling that we really can carve out a space for educational research and SoTL work within nursing education, especially because, as we all mentioned, we're part of the educational leadership stream at UBC, which means though educational leadership and scholarship are part of what we need to demonstrate as we go through promotion and tenure processes, for example, our carve out time for research or educational leadership is quite small. And so we have to think about how we work together, how we share our resources and expertise to do this work well. Yeah, so that's a bit about LearnLab and how we came to be. I guess as some history, we came together as a group of people with shared interests and ideas and sort of dreams about where we wanted to take our educational leadership and scholarship little bit more than a year ago. And it's been just this fantastic process of supporting one another, working collaboratively, laughing a lot, and figuring out where we're going. And it's just really exciting for us to be able to share that with you today. So we have a few questions to guide today's session. The first is, what do we mean when we talk about the scholarship of teaching and learning? SoTL is a word or a term that gets used a lot, not always clearly. So we'll offer you a bit of perspective on how we take that up and how we understand it. How does SoTL relate to educational research? So we will talk about and present sort of a continuum in a way that we're understanding our work with relationship to that continuum. So we're going to share some of the current LearnLab projects and where we situate them in this spectrum from SoTL to educational research. And then we hope to have space for questions and just thoughts talking with you about these topics. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Carla to share a bit more about what do we mean when we talk about SoTL.
All right, so what do we mean when we say the scholarship of teaching and learning? Well, there are different definitions and perceptions regarding SoTL. Huber and Hutchings defined SoTL as asking and answering questions about students' learning in ways that can improve one's own classroom and also advance the larger profession of teaching. So in this definition, what I want us to focus on is the fact that SoTL work is broad in nature. UBC's Institute of Scholarship of Teaching and Learning defines SoTL as a field in post-secondary education that uses systematic, deliberate, and methodological inquiry into teaching to improve student learning. And in this definition, there is an important emphasis on how this work is done. This means that SoTL work is systematic, deliberate, and methodological, meaning that it is rigorous and grounded in educational theories and frameworks. And this is what guides the inquiry into how we go about reflecting on and improving teaching and learning approaches within various teaching spaces that we all occupy. Those who engage in SoTL work is deeply interested in how learning happens or doesn't happen for the purpose, and this is the main goal of SoTL work, is to enhance educational practices and outcomes within and across disciplines. So some examples of SoTL work that you may have seen could include the use of flipped classrooms or curiosities around self-regulated learning and student motivation. It could be about student as partners and or team-based learning. Next slide, please. There have been many times when this has come up, this idea of SoTL and research, and we often get asked, is SoTL research? Perhaps the image to the right can actually help us answer this question. So SoTL and research, particularly, and when we talk about research, what we mean is discipline-based educational research. They share the same space. As you can see, SoTL is the intersection of disciplinary content. So in our case, nursing, and the advancement of teaching and learning. So in other words, how do we advance teaching and learning within the discipline of nursing? And discipline-based education research is a subset of SoTL. wherein discipline-based education research is the application of formal research methodologies to SoTL. And so this is when we start to dream of these research questions and we say, this is how we're going to explore this particular question that we have. And we are going to ground this work with this particular methodology. So in the next few slides, each of us will share examples of SoTL and discipline-based education research work that we're doing currently in the Learn Lab. And next slide, please.
Okay. Excuse me. So the project I'm going to introduce you today is, I would situate more at the educational research and development end of the spectrum that Carla's just introduced. So I've been lucky enough to work in collaboration with the Emerging Media Lab at UBC, which is a experimental space for faculty and students to collaborate on projects. So I've been working over the last 12 months with my co-PI, Dr. Ferriera McQuaig, and a group of WorkLearn students from computer science backgrounds to develop a prototype virtual reality simulation. So our goal when we started this project was, well, first of all, let me explain the problem. So the problem we have is that nurse practitioner students need to learn consultation skills with patients. And that's for two reasons. One, it's 95% of their job, so they need it for their professional practice. And two, all nurse practitioner students have to sit a provincial exam called an OSCE, which is an objective structured clinical examination. So throughout the students' program, they will they have OSCEs to prepare them for this exam and then for practice. And obviously they are out on practicum, but we don't have an easily accessible, scalable option for them to practice their consultation skills in a safe but realistic environment. So our goal was to develop an artificial intelligence-driven virtual reality application that would allow student nurse practitioners to engage in dynamic and interactive consultations that were really realistic with virtual patient avatars to help them prepare for their OSCEs, practice their skills, but most importantly, prepare for the workplace in this safe environment. Next slide, please. So our work is complex, and my students are also learning the skills they're using to develop the prototype. So to date, we've got one OSCE scenario, and it includes a brief instructions for the patient scenario, so like they would have in real life in an OSCE. Sorry, I got distracted then because I changed my slide slightly, but that's not the version we're using, but it's fine. Instructions for the participants on how to use the simulation to put them at ease and make sure they know what they're doing. We've developed some meta-human avatars. So in the video you can see on the screen, they don't look super realistic, but we've been working on developing those even more. And we have a facility to be able to show some results to the student at the end of the scenario and to give some feedback. So the stage we're at now in the project is a proof of concept. So we don't have a perfectly polished scenario that I can take into the classroom yet, and that's why we're sitting in the research and development arena. Next slide, please. Okay, so I was going to show you a video of the simulation in action so you could get a feel for that lifelike conversation, because you could see the conversation between the student and the avatar. Unfortunately, I'm the reason that we had the technical difficulties and started a few minutes late. So I'll move on to some of the key features of the project then. So the students developed the platform using Unreal Engine, which is used to develop video games, and we run it on a Meta Quest, so a virtual reality headset that is expensive, but for large institutions, readily available. We used meta-human avatars with facial animation and body animation to try and really enhance the experiential learning aspects of the simulation. We had to develop a speech-to-speech system, which I'll talk more about, the result scoring algorithm, and lots of different visual assets like our clinic room and built user interfaces, which I'll explain a bit more about. Next slide, please. So some of the major pieces of work we've had to do have been, first of all, working out an appropriate channel for our speech-to-speech elements to go through. So our users can speak, which is picked up by the virtual reality. This is then converted to text and processed using a large language model. And then the response is generated by the large language model in text, and then we somehow had to convert that back into speech from that avatar. So that's been a big part of the development work that the students have been working on under my guidance. And we've also needed to develop animation blueprints, body and face blueprints, and state machines. So what these are detailed scripting of the movements of the avatar. You might have noticed in some of the videos, our pregnant patient Brandy is quite vigorous with her arms, so we're working on trying to make these animations smoother, and those state machines are just the transitions between different animations. Next slide, please. So the key aspect for me, and really the key goal for me, was to develop this conversational aspect that is lacking from existing simulations that we have in nursing and healthcare. So we've integrated our scenario with using OpenAI, so ChatGPT, and leveraged their advanced language models to really facilitate these realistic and dynamic conversations between the student nurse practitioners and the virtual patient avatar, because we know that the more realistic, in terms of experiential learning, the more realistic the scenario can be, the more the students are going to get out of it, versus what we have now is a scenario where they just read off of scripts to each other to try and practice these skills. We've been working hard with prompt engineering to make sure that the avatar follows what we would consider to be the information we would provide in a human-centered OSCE. So we use those same OSCEs that have been developed by the nurse practitioner faculty, program that into the large language model, which facilitates the conversation. But rather than encountering a situation where the avatar says, "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying," because it's outside of its scope, if you like, of pre-programmed responses, the avatar will respond in a lifelike manner, but we'll be able to reorientate the scenario back on the right track without stepping outside to an unrealistic situation. And we also implemented the scoring system using JavaScript object notation. So it records and evaluates the students' interactions and compares these to the OSCE mark sheet, if you like, and is able to give them a score of how well they've performed so that they can have some feedback in terms of improving themselves the next time. All of these aspects are still not perfect, and there's more work that we're hoping to be able to do. Next slide, please. So another aspect has been trying to improve the user experience and the user interfaces. So we've developed lots of different elements like these menu screens you can see. And we've received some informal feedback from a couple of student nurse practitioners to be able to iterate the software based on their feedback. So if you, next slide for me, please. The students told us that they wanted to be able to see when the patient could hear what they were saying. They felt like it was strange for them to just talk, because at the moment we have a bit of a lag between the speech and the response, which we're working on shortening. But for now, we can, the students can see when the avatar has heard what they're saying. And they also asked for that brief scenario brief, sorry, so they could read what was going to be going on in the scenario, just like they would for their human interacting OSCEs. Next slide, please. They also, oh, I'm sorry, I was talking about the wrong slide then. Next slide, please. And they also wanted to be able to push a button rather than just speak, again, for that reassurance that the message they were giving was heard by the software. And they wanted some kind of idea of how long they'd been interacting with the patient. And last slide, please. Oh, I added this one in on my slides, but Elisabeth doesn't have it. I'm really sorry about this. So my next slide was just to say, well, what's next for this project? It costs money to do all of this development. So I've been lucky enough that I was awarded the Logan Findlay grant by the UBC School of Nursing. And I'm in the process of trying to secure some further funding so we can take this proof of concept up to a minimally viable product stage over the next year with the Emerging Media Lab. Thank you very much.
All right, so my turn in April. Elisabeth, Melissa Lee Shang-Ying, who is the director of the Center for Instructional Support with UBC's Faculty of Applied Science, and I were nominated by our faculty and successfully joined the 2024 cohort for the second offering of the Universal Design for Learning Fellows program, which launched in May, just last month, actually. So there's only about 15 projects across campus. And our job is to grow our expertise in UDL, to redesign one of our nursing courses to be more inclusive and accessible. So in this example of a SoTL project, our focus is on a particular lab course, which is Nursing 402, and how we can make our learning management system, which is Canvas, more than just a repository for documents or information that we share with students, and instead recognize Canvas as a mechanism or a tool to promote and sustain student engagement by removing barriers so students can fully participate in their learning. So through this project, which is in its very early stages, what we hope that the results of this project would do is to improve the learning experience for all learners in Nursing 402 and to proactively address some of our learners' common accommodation requirements, allow learners to see Canvas as an engaging platform that supports and responds to a variety of their needs, provide opportunities for the UDL fellows to serve as resources who can support the learnings of others and the adoption of UDL more broadly within our program and the School of Nursing. And also use this space and this opportunity to springboard conversations about UDL within our department and the wider APSI community. So that's an example of SoTL work that we're currently engaging in. And then in the next page, we've got two scoping reviews. So scoping reviews have grown in popularity in the field of health professions education. And I actually just did a quick search through CINAHL to look for how many scoping reviews are actually being done with a focus of nursing education. And I'm sure there's more tweaks to my search strategy, but my very quick and dirty search strategy said that there's about like 300 between 2012 and 2024. So it's still evolving within our discipline. So scoping reviews, as many of you already know, it's often done as a beginning phase of a research project. And scoping reviews is a type of knowledge synthesis that uses a systematic approach to identify and synthesize existing body of literature on a given topic. And so the scoping review that all four of us in the Learn Lab are currently doing stem from our experience as academic nurse educators and how theory-practice gap shows up in our various teaching spaces. We are particularly interested in the strategies nurse educators use in undergraduate nursing programs to close the theory-practice gap in their teaching practices. So we're, again, like I mentioned, we're at the beginning stages of it, and we're not finding many evidence out there. So we'll see. Another scoping review that I'm co-leading stemmed from the curiosities of nurse educators across Canada who are members of the Kazan Nurse Educator Interest Group. And we have several people, I think we have like a 20 group engaging in this scoping review. And the reason why this came about is that the nurse educators noticed that there is a trend among undergraduate nursing students and the anxiety they experience in their clinical practice. In this scoping review, we want to know strategies that have been implemented within undergraduate nursing programs to reduce or mitigate clinical anxiety among this population. And so I'm hoping that these two scoping reviews, well, there is plan to continue building on this, and eventually I see that we will be potentially piloting some of the strategies that we will see within the evidence.
My turn. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about two specific SoTL projects, I guess, that kind of came out of my own classroom, my own teaching. One of them is the iCare framework evaluation. The iCare framework is actually a framework that I've been using in my own particular courses teaching in the BSN program. It stands for Introduction, Connection, Application, Reflection, and Extension. And where this kind of came about is through hearing the concerns from students around kind of the BSN program being a very, very accelerated program, taking place only over 5 consecutive terms, and a lot of content overload being given to them across diverse courses. And where the struggle really was, from what I saw, was their ability to pull knowledge from various courses, which they need to do as nurses to make those critical thinking, clinical judgments, to be able to pull from these different courses to kind of engage with the nursing process. So what I did do actually was go into the literature and try to figure out what other faculties or disciplines have done. And iCare framework, interestingly, comes from high school education. Then it was taken up by higher education, specifically in engineering, and then was taken up by a nursing program. They did evaluate it in their own program, but they took a look at it from the perspective of feasibility and uptake. My particular interest was around how does this framework actually enhance teaching and learning in my own classroom in terms of helping the students pull knowledge from various courses and then be able to apply it to clinical cases. So the research question then guiding this work was, what are the impacts of the iCare framework on undergraduate nursing students' ability to draw on knowledge delivered across BSN courses? It is funded by CTLT SoTL. It's a very small project still in my own classroom, and the project has actually concluded, and I am hoping to see if we can actually take it up a notch and see how this would work across other courses and not just in my own practice. Another project that Ash and I are co-leading is the Pharmacology to Go. Now, where did this come from? Again, it came from my own classroom. And this is because I was teaching pharmacology. It's only a 2-credit course in our program. That means only 9 weeks. And there was a lot of concerns raised by our own students and clinical instructors, for that matter, that they're given very limited scope of pharmacology, yet pharmacology is one of the key pillars or foundations of nursing practice. And really, it ought to be transferred with them from class to class to class. So what we are in the process of doing is actually creating a platform that will provide students an opportunity, if they choose to, it's not mandatory platform, to independently engage with pharmacological content as they progress through various courses. And it is a platform that uses technology, of course. So currently we're in the development phase. We do have a student, a grad student who is part of our research team as a research graduate student, I think, or graduate research assistant, I should say, who is also a pharmacist by training. So we're kind of lucky in that way, who is doing the development phase. And then we hope to start the implementation phase, hopefully in the fall, and then evaluate it eventually. This one is funded again through a seed grant through AppSci. Next slide, please. So those were kind of subtle questions, right? Things that really came out of my own practice. An example of educational research that I would like to share with you. This one is being co-led by myself, Lillian Hung, and Fatau Abdullahi, where we are looking at students' perspectives on the use of AI-enabled tools. Now, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone in this space who teaches. We have seen a very substantial rapid growth in the integration of AI-enabled tools, specifically ChatGPT, in higher education. I don't think we can deny it anymore. It's out there and students are using it, and the tools are becoming smarter and smarter. So while it does provide a lot of advantages, it does come with potential misinformation, over-reliance on AI-generated content, and of course the challenge of academic integrity. So what we did do is we have actually evaluated, starting with our own students, evaluated their perspectives around using these tools in terms of how they are advantageous or not, and some barriers around it in terms of guiding their academic work. So this is where our focus is, the academic piece in terms of scholarly work, but with a focus on also nursing knowledge and nursing process. We have collected and analyzed our data. We're actually in the dissemination phase. And the next, this project, I should say, was funded by Lillian Hung's lab. And we are now applying for another small funding to actually now disseminate our results. Yeah. I send Elisabeth. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Even though I know about these projects, I'm like nodding along with excitement as I hear about all the work that people are doing. So I'm going to speak briefly about my work related to self and collective care in the undergraduate program. I'm really grateful to work with Nassim as a co-PI on this evaluation project, and also some wonderful team members whose names are there on the screen. And I'll say at the beginning, the initial work around this project was funded by an internal School of Nursing internal grant, the Finley Fund. And then we were able to get funding through Wellbeing Strategic Initiatives to fund the adaptation for faculty and staff that I'll mention. So what we know is that provider well-being is one of the core goals of what's now called the quintuple aim of systems improvement. And attending to provider well-being is foundational to a healthy workforce and a safe workplace, and is really an underpinning for excellence in trauma and violence-informed care delivery. And of course, providers start out as students, right? So their first experiences with becoming nurses and entering into healthcare practice is often with us in the undergraduate nursing program. And as we all know, having lived through the pandemic and the upheaval that caused within our healthcare systems and also within our healthcare educational systems, the anxiety and stress and complexities of working in healthcare were present before the pandemic, and were certainly exacerbated by the experience of the pandemic. So there was interest even before that time around student well-being, but I guess the acuity of needing to figure out how we can support students during their time as undergraduates and through their transition to practice is a little bit more acute post-pandemic. So our question is broadly, how can we better support BSN students in developing the skills they need to support their personal and professional well-being and resilience, while also importantly thinking about systems and structural challenges and solutions. So not saying, what is it only that you, the individual, can do to support your well-being, but rather how can each of us individually and collectively as part of a larger system think about creating healthcare education and healthcare delivery systems that are humane, that treat people with dignity, and that ultimately foster well-being of everyone within the system. So our strategy, we started a few years ago with a quick review of the literature on resilience, self-care, and well-being in nursing education. And I had wonderful support in that process through MHLP clinical education graduate students. Once we'd had a look at the literature and also met with our undergraduate program committee, and through conversations that naturally sort of developed out of my roles within the school as teacher and undergraduate advisor, we took our learnings from those various places and developed a self and collective care series of modules in close consultation with the curricular committee, the teaching teams, and graduate students in terms of the development of what goes into the modules that we present to the students. And then we piloted a series of 4 modules situated throughout the 20-month BSN program, with the goal of evaluating the project. And most recently, we've also gone through with an adaptation for faculty and staff. We have gone through one full delivery of the series of modules with our initial pilot cohort and are now partway through the delivery of the second cohort of students through this series of modules. So brief overview of the work that we're doing, or the modules that we're delivering. Module 1 really introduces the concepts of stress, resilience, and self-care, and links it to nursing practice. So specifically thinking about our responsibilities as nurses to maintain our own fitness to practice, as well as looking at concepts that are foundational to relational inquiry, related to nurse well-being, systems well-being, and patient or community well-being being an interrelated whole. We also ask the students to start thinking about building an evidence-based and effective self-care plan, sort of a foundational proactive care plan for themselves, using some strategies and tools that we provide. In Module 2, which is delivered in Term 2 of the program, we move into really thinking about in-the-moment self-care strategies. So if we think about the practice of nursing as inherently involving some episodes of stress and overwhelm, like that's just part of practicing in busy and complicated healthcare contexts, then it makes sense. We need to prepare people to manage the very natural feelings of stress, anxiety, or overwhelm that might arise during the course of your practice day. And so in Module 2, we ask students to pay attention to their the cues. How do they know when they're in their resilient zone, that sort of space when they can respond thoughtfully to situations that arise in clinical practice, and when might they be bounced out of that resilient zone where they're feeling quite overwhelmed and feeling like perhaps they aren't able to draw from a grounded place in terms of being able to respond to situations as they arise, whether that's on an exam or in a clinical context. And importantly, we provide them with evidence-based strategies to support self-regulation in stressful situations, and invite them to practice those strategies. Module 3 continues to build on these foundations and talks about additional evidence-based strategies to support well-being. We particularly talk about mindful awareness practices, both for their ability to help people stay present in stressful situations, but also in just enhancing people's attentional capacity, which is especially important in our sort of, I don't know, world of hyper distraction and continuous partial disruptions. Can be really helpful to tangibly practice paying attention. We also talk about the importance of gratitude and building in individual and team-based rituals. For example, a warm-up ritual as on your way into the clinical day and a cool-down ritual on the way out of the clinical day, as well as things like social connection and this idea of putting your own oxygen mask on first so that you can look towards your colleagues and support the collective well-being of the people and systems around you. And finally, in the last module, which happens in Term 5, so as they're transitioning into preceptorship, we really dig deeper into the limitations of individual resilience and self-oriented self-care, and think about organizational and systemic responsibilities, thinking about or further elaborating on the idea that self-care is really foundational to patient or person-centered care. And thinking about transition to practice. So the structure of each of these modules is that there's an asynchronous learning module housed in practice-based course Canvas sites. There are prompts to practice offered to the students during the term. So there's sort of structured practice activities in that asynchronous module. We offer them reminders to practice during the term, and then there's a synchronous facilitated debrief in small groups towards the end of the term. Our evaluation questions when we moved to evaluate this project are these: does the Self and Collective Care series support students to develop reflective skills related to our primary domains of interest? So stress management and self and collective care, mindful and reflective practice, and social connection and belonging. We were curious about whether the series, which is delivered throughout the program, meets the changing needs of students as they move through the undergraduate program, and what do they perceive as the strengths and limitations of the series. I'll just share, so as I mentioned, we've delivered this series to the first pilot cohort of students and have gathered data and are analyzing that data. And Naseem, please feel free to jump in if I'm saying anything that doesn't sound totally accurate. But I think where we're landing what we're learning as we're digging into the data that we've received from students is that nursing students have chosen a caring profession. They carry a lot of guilt around taking time to care for themselves, especially during a time when they're really learning to care for others. So part of the value of having a structured approach to promoting self-care is it gives them permission to actually reflect on and take time for themselves. It provides some scaffolding and support for thinking about how might I integrate self-care strategies and practices into a very busy academic life, but then also in thinking about how's this going to work as I transition to practice. And the opportunity to talk with one another, to hear about others' ideas, to hear what's working well for other students is a strength. And finally, an interesting emerging finding is the idea that they do see the link between self-care and patient-centered care, that in order to show up well for the people that we care for and for our colleagues, we do need to attend to our own well-being. So they're way in to allowing themselves to access self-care, maybe through that linkage, that to be a good provider, we're engaging in this self-care work. So what's next is an adaptation of modules for faculty and staff, which is underway, which is taking these modules and adapting them slightly so they introduce all of the content that students are exposed to, but also have additional types of reflection for faculty and staff, whether that's related to their practice as nursing educators or as colleagues or leaders. We've adapted some of the material to be appropriate to faculty and staff use. Carla mentioned earlier the Kazan scoping review around anxiety in clinical context. So one thing we're interested in is looking at deliberate and supported practice of self-regulation and exploring spaces like simulation space when students are dealing with some of that anxiety, but in a safer space where they don't have to worry about the impact of their experience on patient outcomes, but still have the opportunity to practice regulating difficult emotions. Building that into our simulation work is an area of real interest for me, and I'm so lucky to work with colleagues who can help figure out how we do that in a good way. So I think I'll pause there because I realize we're quite close to 1 o'clock, and want to make sure we have at least a few minutes to take some questions. But thank you so much to all of you for listening about our work.